It's because, for example, you mentioned boutique pedals, right? But let's take, for example, I don't know, a pedal like, I don't know, a Boss, an MXR. These are brands that have already been established in the market. I don't know, I think the Boss pedal has been in the market for, what, 40, 50 years, maybe even more than that.
From the 70s, right?
They make something that is a very robust pedal. It's a tank. The components are really nice. Historically, at least here in Brazil, they were never sold at very high prices. The MXRs I already saw being sold at a slightly higher price in comparison. For example, with these, I don't know, let's take a classic pedal, a Boss Blues Driver, which is a very classic drive pedal. I find it very versatile for playing a good part of styles, comparing it with some Chinese counterpart. Taking into consideration, obviously you mentioned the dollar, these pedals are sold in dollars, but they wouldn't be as expensive today as they were, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago. They're still at an affordable price. Comparing these two brands, for example, not considering a boutique pedal, but these more established ones, it's still quite competitive. This competition, is it still worth investing in a Boss or an MXR, or should one go for a Chinese pedal? In this case, considering quality and cost benefit, is it still worth it?
So, answering first, right? What comes today is the exclusivity due to that rule. Of the 3/4, so I'll give a specific example of Boss. The most classic pedals from Boss have already been emulated by numerous companies, not just the Chinese, right? Oh yes, many. Take the Tube Screamer. Every company makes one. Oh, definitely, if they don't have it, they're doing it wrong, right? If you take the Tube Screamer, the original Tube Screamer is whopping 200 new, 700 used, and you get a Chinese clone for 100 rays. Yes, and that's exactly how it is. Of course, there's the issue of purism, right? No, because the chip and such have a sound, but the overall sound in a live setting will sound quite similar. But Boss, it is a company that has two things. It is a market commodity. Boss is a brand, and Boss has exclusivity that the Chinese don't clone. For example, if we take Boss's Harmony, there's no clone of it. Behringer even had some, but Behringer has become a legend today, right? There are rare Behringer pedals today, right? But in a post-Behringer era, there are pedals. It's like Café Seja. How is it? It's like Café Seja. Café Seja is to season the Boss ones. It's the truth of the Boss. It's time and age of the Boss that are unique. For example, the DD20, which is a fantastic pedal. The DD20, which is the best by law that I've ever played, and I still have it today. So, there are pedals that the Chinese won't reach. So, these exclusivities, Boss still maintains this pioneering spirit, and it's still worth buying the original.
But because of this rule, exactly 3/4 va to ship, the technology they have in the pedal would make it very expensive. It would be easier. Exactly, you'll end up with a similar price with a difference of $30.
You'll buy the original because we also have to consider the market A, B, and C. Brazil is market C, just like Indonesia is, like Taiwan is. It doesn't have to compete with market A because China, for example, it's difficult to enter the United States. Some Americans even use the Chinese pedal, but it's very rare because Boss there is not that expensive.
Their Boss is like a Fender, right? Exactly. It's a product there that has a very affordable price for them. It's very common. I don't know for you as a guitarist in the United States to start playing. You have a Fender, even if it's maybe a Mexican one, but it already has very good quality. And a set of 3 or 4 Boss pedals that will suit you well. A nice amplifier, and it won't cost you as much as it does here in Brazil.
Exactly. A Fender there, if you buy it new, you're in luck. You pay less than $1,000.
That's an American one.
And if you get a used one on Craigslist, you pay $400 for a used guitar from some student who bought it and didn't want it anymore. That's good. So for an American, instead of paying for a Boss, now the Chinese understood that this market doesn't compete. They started to tap into the markets of Brazil, Indonesia, Taiwan, because these are markets where we have the same problem. The dollar is very high, very expensive. So the Chinese, understanding this, there are areas they don't reach on purpose, really. So the Boss in this regard, for example, is still worth it. Not just Boss, I'm saying Boss, but you can put any brand in its place. Now, with the more classic and cheaper pedals, the Chinese in these B and C markets, they perform well. They manage to reach easily. There's the cost issue that Bill mentioned, but the Chinese product doesn't last. But if it lasts a year, it has already paid for itself.
Exactly. Then you buy another one because financially speaking, the comparison, for example, you're talking about a very simple pedal. Simple, right? Let's use the example of the tube screamer, right? You mentioned that there are brushes there for 100 rees. You're really up to date, right? You know, all my references without re-eyes, right? New one. If you go to get a new one in the store today, I think it doesn't cost less than 1,000 rees.
I think it's 200, 200, 200, 200 for one.
Man, my brother, that's a big difference. Now, let me just give a little input here, a little comment on this voice story. What happens, man? You mentioned something interesting, the voice. Although it has always been used by many professional guitarists of all levels, in the studio, live, and so on. The voice, really, it has always been considered a kind of, the voice pedal, right? A somewhat popular piece of equipment, right? An entry-level one, right? You'll see, most guitarists, even those who are just starting, will know it's there, an overdrive. I see the picture of the little thing there, yellowish, right? The orange one of the voice. It's very accessible. These are pieces that today, if you enter the used market, you'll find a drive like this, an orange one like this, at least here in Rio de Janeiro, which is a cheaper place, around 250, like this 50 reais used.
My first Boss pedal was a Metal Zone that I bought used from the now defunct counter.
The younger crowd doesn't know what that is.
But there was a printed newspaper paper sold at newsstands.
That's true.
And I bought, man, a Metal Zone for 200 reais, but it was practically new.
And I'll tell you, I have a Boss collection with a bunch of those pedals, of course, with different modifications, different sound. But like, man, I've managed to get them much cheaper than that, like 150, 120 reais and so on. So what happens? So it's theoretically an entry-level brand, although it has some classics. Now, it's important for us to explain what a boutique pedal is, because people sometimes have difficulty understanding what it would be. A boutique pedal, basically, it would be a pedal that took the platform of a classic pedal, which could be an SD1, or a tube screamer, or a blues breaker, a distortion plus, or a rat, any of those pedals, which is an iconic pedal. And they developed modifications aiming to improve some aspects of the sound of this pedal. For example, to give more volume, the pedal has little volume. I want the pedal to have more output volume. So I'm going to make a mod for that. I want the tone equalization part to sound different. Equalize it differently. I'm going to work on that. I want the grain of the distortion for the pedal to have more distortion, to have different clipping. Do you understand?
And you end up arriving at something original from something that was already established there.
And then, along with that, what is the person going to incorporate? They will incorporate a cooler construction. Suddenly, if it's the case, for example, with fan pedals, many pedals are point-to-point. The components of the pedals are more selected components, right? Top of the line. The potentiometers are nice. The casing is a unique casing. The paint is different, the art is different, the name is different. This makes the pedal become a more exclusive pedal. And, of course, made by small companies, a limited quantity in the market. And the tendency for that is to be much more expensive because, especially in America, this issue of artisanal products, they place a lot of value on this aspect.
Just look at the people from Zevex.
Making an artisanal product, a handmade product. In Brazil, we don't have much of this culture. In Brazil, they always think that industrialized is cooler than the handmade one. So what happens? I believe that, combining what Daniel said, the cost issue, which sometimes isn't worth it. I think the market for these Chinese builders, they are much more focused on these boutique brands, on cloning these brands because the price is really much higher.
Understand?
Do you understand? So it's more worthwhile. And then you realize that what a guitarist, a more experienced one, looks for a boutique pedal. You might say it's because it's more expensive, because the guy wants to show off. That could be the reason. But I think it has much more to do with the sound quality, because a boy's pedal is a common pedal, a boy's pedal. SD1, anyone can buy it and it will be standardized. Now, a boutique one, you'll see, man, what a sound this pedal has. What does this pedal bring me?
So there's also this aspect of the boutique pedal. It comes with an exclusivity that you won't find in those that are mass-produced. Even though I mentioned Boston and MXR, we also have other brands in. Your sound will be similar to other guitarists, other musicians who also have that pedal. You can't stand out as much in terms of sound.
I think it's more along those lines too. There's a lot of that, right? One thing I was thinking about when you were talking, this guitar world, right? This on, this up, this in, all this tradition. It comes a lot from the United States. So we will always look at everything that comes from the United States as a very big reference. So when we compare, for example, I'll talk here about the part that concerns me. For example, someone will compare an American pedal with a national one, both costs. They will always think the American one is cooler, even if the Brazilian one is at a very high level.
I think that in some points, right, on the Starling Cast, we've already brought several pedal manufacturers, right? We've already brought Marcelo from Guitar Tech, Marcelo from Wavebox. Collateral also came, Nardelli, so many national manufacturers, right, of pedals. And what I noticed, both talking to them and seeing their product, man, it simply leaves nothing to be desired compared to the American product. I say that in some cases it's even better. There are things there that I see, man, I haven't seen any pedal abroad doing this here, or having this care with the pedal. And I think it's such nonsense when people do exactly what you said, make this comparison and give preference to the,
It's because there's an emotional aspect to it. I agree with that. It's not just about the hearing. For example, not every guitarist is curious to open the pedal to see how it's made inside. To put one next to the other and say, man, what's here? What's here? What's different, right? Come on. What component is this here? Most guitarists don't do that. The guitarist is very influenced, yes, today by influences, right? Professional people in this field, digitally, right? Digitally influenced, but heavily influenced by the guitarist. From their imagination of that guy who, man, recorded that album or is part of that particular band, and the guy uses that. So for him, the guitarist is this emotional guy, the sentimental guy in that sense, right? Few people have this approach that you have, especially because you're someone who is interested in this. That's why you do it. But the vast majority don't, man. The vast majority go with the flow. Under the influence of someone. Because they saw someone. Because someone said, let me give an example, right? Remember when that Josh from JHS talked about the Bad Monkey? Yes. He valued the T-Tech, man. It was a matter of a few days, man. I saw people selling a pedal that was sold for $350, then 1,000 reais. 1,000 reais.
Just because the guy said it, man. We've already done this on Starling Cast. Unintentionally, we inflated the prices of some equipment here.
Picking up on Bill's point, just so the topic doesn't move on and I end up losing track of it. This boutique issue is a very American thing. Something English, but it's very American. Because Americans, if you look, are very much about culture. And what clashes with our culture, there are 2 points. First is the culture, obviously, because we have accusation, etc. And second is the financial aspect, because Americans are very much about culture. Just take boutique pedals, they have an approach very similar to cars. Americans have a passion for tinkering with cars. He can, yes, exactly. And the pedal, let's take the example of Analog Man, right? Which is a pedal that Bill really likes. And I got to know it through Bill, in fact. And Analog Man has a whole process of getting to that sound. And that captivates people. The boutique pedal for Americans has a value and not a cost. It has value and not a price. However, in an American reality where it's a market where things are relatively fairly priced, this works. When we get to Brazil, the boutique pedal goes through 2 filters. First, through the filter of purchasing power, which is low. And second, the power of financial insecurity, where people here in Brazil, unfortunately, many already refrain from buying things because they don't have resale value. Yes, totally. You understand. So the person prefers to get a Stream On, a famous brand, because they know that if needed, they will be able to sell it. Exactly. Because financial insecurity here is very high. So you see how culture influences. So sometimes many call it an inferiority complex, which is a term I find horrible. But sometimes the person doesn't choose a domestic product because the resale value will be low. I'll lose money.
It's that it won't have as much liquidity as a pedal like this one that's already known that we know people are using. The Streaman is very famous within the gospel scene. People who play worship use it a lot.
Exactly.
So he knows that if he needs to resell, he has liquidity in a relatively quick manner.
Because people already buy thinking about selling to buy another piece of equipment, because here in Brazil you have to sell something. In reality, 99% of people have to sell something to buy. It's completely different abroad. So you see how culture influences, because Americans have several. I have friends there in the United States because of the channel I made. The guys have a pile of pedals at home. And it's a reality. Sorry to interrupt, a completely different reality. And then where does the Chinese come in and fill the gap that was missing the Chinese?
Here in Brazil, he found an absurd market opportunity, right, man?
I'm talking about Brazil. Sorry to interrupt you once again. But this same reality in Brazil, we see in Taiwan, we see in Indonesia, emerging markets, exactly everyone there. We have a problem with Oriental music. We hardly know it. For example, do you know any Chinese metal bands? Not Chinese, Japanese, yes, but Chinese Indonesian band. We don't know them. There's the language barrier anyway, but there is a super strong guitar market there, a super strong pedal market. But people had the same problem as us. They couldn't afford it because it's very expensive. And China went there and distributed, right? Outside of Latin America.
Well, whoa, once I heard, I don't know if it was it was an interview. It was with him from Sao Paulo, who is quite famous now for guitars, who is mainly the uncle today. In Brazil, I forgot his name, man. Now I blanked on which brand, the guitar brand, music maker. And I think it was an interview with him. He said the following phrase, the American. He was the standard of quality, right? And he developed the business until reaching a decent standard. Then in the late 70s, right? The Japanese took that and perfected it, right? Talking about guitars, right? You had Fender, Gibson, and so on. I agree. There, in the end, Ibanez, Greco started to appear, right? Brands that took that American essence and elevated it, really turned the key, right? And wow, they launched very good instruments and so on, became a reference. There, throughout the late 70s and all of the 80s, Japanese instruments dominated, right? Yes, even Fender, that's it. Anyone who knows Fender's history knows what I'm talking about. Then in the late 80s, another player entered the business, which were the Koreans. South Korea, when the Brazilian market opened, those who remember this, it was flooded with Korean instruments. Samich, Washburn. Those brands, all of them, made in Korea, right? And, well, they boomed. And they had very good quality control. And with prices already down there, but, they dominated the market. I'm talking about market dominance, right? And now, dear, the player, it's the Chinese. There's no way around it. We're talking about tolls, but when we look ahead, if we're going to talk about instruments, guitars, basses, acoustic guitars, accessories, man, there's no way around it. It's something like this. There's no turning back from.
There's nowhere to run.
Exactly. There's not. That's it.